I don't want a woman with a belly that looks like a monster. You'll have to raise the child alone." His voice was filled with a chill that tore through my whole being. There was something new in his eyes, unknown to me, and it made me tremble. This look did not belong to the Anton with whom I once shared the brightest dreams. Now his eyes radiated contempt, and a vulgar smile stretched across his lips, in which there was not a drop of former love left. In the 9th month of pregnancy, I no longer felt like just a woman, but something more than ever before, but at the same time terribly fragile. The miracle of a new life was supposed to bring light and joy to our family, but the reality turned out to be different. His words hit me like the raging waves of a storm, and I struggled to stay afloat in this ocean of pain and disappointment. I've always been waiting for this. This is the day when the veil will finally fall from my eyes. The day when the truth, so long hidden in the shadows of his behavior, will finally come to light. Despite the pain spreading in my chest, I met his cold gaze and, without looking away, said decisively, "Now it's all over." I saw his face contort in surprise for a moment, but it quickly returns to its former expression, an expression of indifference and confidence. He turned around and went to his room, but returned a few minutes later, holding documents in his hands. "Here are the divorce papers." His voice was icy. It was as if I was already anticipating this moment, but even then my heart was squeezed by a sharp pain. He handed me the papers. His gaze remained intense, as if he was looking in my eyes for something that I had long lost: awe, submission, fear. Anton grimaced, his face momentarily losing its self-confidence. "What the hell? What is all this? What is it?" he asked, his voice now breaking through the cracks of rage and bewilderment. "It was your idea, Anton. Sign it." "I'll send them tomorrow." I lifted my chin, trying not to flinch under his onslaught. That anger mixed with contempt flashed in his eyes again. His face turned red, and I saw my words sting him like a dagger in the flesh. "Look carefully, Anton. I'm going to make you regret the way you treated me, the way you looked down on me," I said with a confidence I didn't expect from myself. This moment was a turning point. Now I wasn't just a woman he could humiliate and abandon, I was Helen. I am 26 years old and I am a housewife. Or rather, I was a housewife before I started working for a mobile company 2 years ago, where I first met Anton Cade, my boss. I was only 24 at the time, and he became my guide, my support, the one who helped me navigate the complex world of professional life. Anton was 3 years older, wise with experience and extremely charming. His calmness and confidence seemed unattainable to me. I felt like he was always one step ahead, leading me through the maze of my inexperience and insecurity. In a short time we became friends, and then it turned into something more. Dinner after dinner, conversation after conversation, our feelings flared up with amazing force. I've never dated anyone before. It was an almost embarrassing fact of my biography that I rarely shared. As a child and teenager, I was more interested in cartoons and fictional characters than real people. Love in the world of animation seemed to me to be something pure and perfect, unlike the complexities of real life. But when Anton asked me to date, I felt that this was my chance. My first and last chance at the love I've dreamed of since childhood. I plunged into this relationship like into a whirlpool with my head, convincing myself that Anton is the very person with whom I will live my whole life. I informed my parents yesterday, the day after Anton and I applied for marriage registration. This day was supposed to be the beginning of a new family life full of bright hopes. We were on the threshold of something great, and I, all immersed in dreams of the future, could hardly believe that I would soon become his wife. From that moment on, everything had to change, and I thought that these changes would bring happiness and peace. However, that evening Anton seemed to have decided to erase all my expectations. His words, uttered with absolute certainty, echoed in my head. "I always wanted my wife to focus exclusively on household chores. Don't worry, I'll be able to support both of us with my income." These words sounded as if they had been prepared in advance. He said them so easily, as if it wasn't something important. I stood in front of him at a loss. My heart sank with surprise, because he had never mentioned this before, before our wedding. My job is not just a source of income. She was a part of me, of who I am. I couldn't imagine giving up on her so easily. But it's so unexpected. You've never told me this before. My voice was shaking, but I tried to hold on, trying to figure out how to react to such a harsh statement. It doesn't matter now, his words sounded like a final verdict. He didn't even look at me, as if this conversation was routine for him. You're not working anymore from tomorrow. I'll take care of everything. I'll handle the transfer of cases. Everything will be ready. I tried to object. I wanted to say that my father helped me get this job, that it would be wrong to just leave. But there was something in Anton's eyes that silenced me. This silent pressure, this invisible warning. He did not want to continue this topic, and I instinctively realized that any resistance would be useless. I closed my mouth, as if my words could be the beginning of an even bigger conflict that I wasn't ready for. I should have told you this sooner, he continued. But it's all settled now. You're not going to work tomorrow. The world I knew was crumbling right under my feet. This news, which sounded like a command, so suddenly turned my head that I felt a little dizzy. How could everything have changed so dramatically? I always thought that our family life would be more balanced, where I would have room for my own development. But Anton's words were decisive, final. He left me no choice. I couldn't sleep for a long time that night. Conflicting feelings were fighting in my soul. On the one hand, I could not disappoint my husband. After all, Anton entrusted me with the management of the house, and I felt that I had to meet his expectations. On the other hand, the shadow of doubt tightened its grip on my heart. I lost not only my job, but also my sense of independence, the feeling that I could control at least part of my life. The next morning, as if by magic, a new chapter of my life began. I turned into a housewife. Things that I didn't pay attention to before have now become my main responsibilities. I diligently cooked the food, focusing on Anton's favorite dishes. She put everything she could on the table, trying to please him in everything. The table was always full, the dishes varied, but Anton ate them without saying a word. I longingly expected him to say at least once that he was delicious, but instead he went into his silence, as if it were a matter of course. I didn't have enough words of appreciation. I longed to hear that my efforts were valuable, that I was doing something right. After I left my job, it became even more difficult for me. No one recognized my merits anymore. No one celebrated my successes. The only person whose opinion mattered to me now was Anton. I tried my best to make him notice my efforts. I have an important meeting tomorrow, Anton said one evening. Is my jacket clean? Yes, of course, I replied, habitually looking into the closet and making sure that everything was in order. Anton has always been a man of strict principles. He held some old-fashioned views, and his overbearing side was showing up more and more often. But I kept reminding myself how lucky I was to have married him. After all, he provided for us, and thanks to him I could stay at home without thinking about money. I told myself that I should be grateful for all this. Every day I took on new responsibilities to meet his expectations. After all, without a personal income, without a job that once gave me a sense of independence, I had no other way to live normally except with Anton. Although our relationship often seemed more like a working relationship than a family one, where I was a housewife and Anton was the boss, our life went pretty smoothly. I got used to my new position and tried not to notice that somewhere deep inside me discontent was growing. Everything changed the day I suddenly fell ill and couldn't get out of bed. Lethargy gripped my whole body, and I thought, I'll make up for everything tomorrow, rest for a day, and everything will be as before again. Anton entered the bedroom, and his face was full of displeasure. He wasn't used to seeing me like this, and it seemed to annoy him that I couldn't perform my duties. What are you doing? He growled as he walked over to the bed. Get up and cook some food. I felt his foot roughly kick the blanket I was lying under, as if my rest was something outrageous. I'm sorry, I feel bad today. Maybe you can cook something yourself? I said softly, hoping for understanding, praying that at least a drop of compassion would appear in his eyes. But instead, Anton frowned even harder. his face contorted in an expression of annoyance and contempt. Don't you work just to lie down because you feel a little sick? It's a pathetic sight, get up. With that, he kicked me under the covers again. I stood up, stunned and humiliated. It was unthinkable that my husband, to whom I devoted all my life, required me to work around the house, even when I was ill. I was probably too naive when I believed that he would be different. But now everything has become too obvious. The man who once seemed kind and caring was a stranger to compassion. Tears were coming to my eyes, but I was doing my chores, not letting them escape. A few days have passed, but my health has not improved. I felt worse and worse, until one day I realized that I had missed my period. My heart started beating faster, and I immediately rushed to the pharmacy to buy a pregnancy test. When I saw the 2 stripes, my emotions overwhelmed me. Tears of happiness flowed by themselves, and despite the pain, I felt an extraordinary joy. It was something I had wanted for so long. I decided to let Anton know when he gets back from work. That day, I was looking forward to his return, full of joy, imagining how he would also be delighted with the news about our future child. But Anton didn't get home until after midnight, and the smell of alcohol hit me in the nose before he could even say a word. His face was red and his gait was unsteady. I was stunned by how much he drank, especially without telling me in advance, and I had specially prepared dinner, wanting to create a cozy atmosphere for our conversation. I started excitedly. Anton, I have great news for you. I'm pregnant. But even before I could finish, I noticed how his face suddenly became gloomy, as if something dark and heavy had come over him. A child? His voice sounded hollow, and there was so much disgust in it that it turned my insides cold. What did you do? His words sounded like a slap in the face. I froze in place, not understanding what was happening. My dreams of happiness merged with his harsh and displeased tone. I don't want a baby, he continued roughly, taking off his clothes and heading for the bathroom. If you're going to raise him, you raise him yourself. This is the worst thing that could have happened. His words shocked me to the core. How could a man I loved and trusted give up a child so easily? All my happiness instantly melted away, and I felt a heavy, unbearable pain. Why did he say that? Why did he say he didn't want children if we never use any protection? I was sure that we both wanted children. With despair in my heart, I began to pack his laundry. When I took off his jacket, something fell out of his pocket. It was a check. For a second I thought it was just a receipt from his meeting today, and I was going to throw it away, but then the name on it caught my attention. The motel. My hand trembled, and I instantly realized what kind of place it was. The check was from the motel, and I knew by the date that it had happened quite recently. A warm wave of horror washed over me, and my mind refused to believe what I had just discovered. The shock of this discovery weighed heavily on my heart. My mind, as if trapped in the grip of contradictions, could not contain the thought that Anton could betray me. After all, we'd been married for a little over a year. How is this possible? I dreamed of romantic love all the time, spent years in fantasies, and real life turned out to be much more harsh. I had never had a serious relationship before, and now, faced with this cruel betrayal, I couldn't believe that the man to whom I gave all of myself turned out to be so far from my ideas of love. My fantasy, which idealized Anton, began to collapse. His abrupt behavior after the news of my pregnancy began to take on a new meaning. Everything seemed to add up to a single whole: his coldness, discontent, rudeness. And now this check from the motel that I found. Perhaps he did not marry me out of love, but only for convenience. Was it true? Or did my mind, shocked by such a discovery, adjust all the facts itself to a terrible conclusion? I tried again and again to find an explanation for his words on that ill-fated day when he found out that I was pregnant. But remembering his expression, I couldn't ignore the callous coldness with which he rejected the news about the baby. His indifference was unbearable. Perhaps the reason was that there was already another woman in his life. Perhaps she was the true target of his attention, and I was just a convenient figure, a cover for the outside world. The line between reality and my thoughts became increasingly blurred. I couldn't figure out where my guesses ended and the truth began. But one thing was clear: Anton's words about my pregnancy left me in no doubt. His indifference and contempt, like this check, demanded answers. I decided to collect evidence of his infidelity. My mind was bursting with conflicting feelings. Love and disappointment were fighting inside me, but one thing was clear: I had to find out the truth. Since then, his behavior has become even more violent and indifferent. It was like he couldn't forgive me for getting pregnant. Even knowing how much nausea torments me, Anton purposely ate smelly dishes right in front of me. His every action was filled with irritation. I felt my strength draining under the weight of all these household chores and my husband's contemptuous attitude. Nevertheless, I continued to investigate his affair. It turned out to be harder than I thought. Anton never parted with his phone. He even took it with him to the bathroom. I tried to find at least some clues, but each time I found myself with nothing. One day, sneaking into his room, I saw how everything was spotlessly clean, as if Anton was carefully hiding his tracks. The table was in perfect order, and no compromising objects caught my eye. My every effort ran into a cold wall. He was meticulous to the smallest detail and never left anything that could give him away. In desperation, I started checking his pockets for checks, letters, or any evidence. However, my search was in vain. The idea of hiring a private investigator flashed through my mind, but I didn't have the money for such expenses. One day, when I was thinking about my situation again, the phone suddenly rang. It was my father. He rarely called me, which made his call even more unexpected. "Hi, it's me, your dad. How are you?" he asked. I was surprised by his call. My father was always absorbed in his work. His life in Canada was far from mine. He was the CEO of a large company, and I had few childhood memories of him playing with me or spending time with me. All I remembered was his endless trips and meetings. "Dad, what's going on? Are you busy at work?" I asked in surprise, hoping to understand the reason for his unexpected call. "My staff are doing a great job, so I don't have much to do," he explained calmly. I couldn't help but admire his dedication to his work. He was a workaholic, but at the same time he always seemed to me like a person I could trust. Now, after all these years, his call made me curious. "What happened?" My father's answer shocked me. His words seemed to scatter in the air like a bolt from the blue. I was stunned when I heard these words from my father, and at first I couldn't answer. My mind raced in search of explanations, trying to piece together everything I had learned. However, as the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, I suddenly felt relieved. Yes, the shock was strong, but at the same time I was overcome by the feeling that I had finally gained clarity in the chaos that had surrounded me in recent months. "Thanks, Dad. I'll do my best," I told him with deep gratitude before hanging up the phone. After that conversation, my research finally paid off, and I felt a mixture of excitement and anger. Yes, knowing that I was right in my suspicions brought some satisfaction. But it also ignited a fire of frustration and rage inside me. My life, my hopes for family happiness turned out to be a dissection. Anton, the man with whom I shared my home and future life, continued to keep his distance, as if nothing had changed. However, everything has changed for me. I was pregnant, and at the same time I felt a growing hatred for my husband. Months passed, but relations with Anton did not improve, but, on the contrary, became more and more strained. There was no warmth or care in his gaze anymore. Even in the 9th month of pregnancy, I still lived in a constant state of anxiety, feeling his indifference pierce my heart deeper and deeper. Every day I tried to keep my distance, avoiding conflicts. I tried to carry out my duties, served dinner, kept an eye on the house, hoping that at least in this way I could maintain a delicate balance. But one day, as usual, while serving dinner and sitting down at the table, I noticed something subtly dangerous in his gaze. Anton returned home later than usual, clearly annoyed. We sat down at the table, and I tried to stay calm, as always. However, Suddenly, Anton hit the table with his fork. "What kind of filth is this?" he shouted furiously, throwing the food I had prepared right on the floor. My heart sank with surprise and pain. I was confused by his outburst, not understanding what could have provoked it. Anger began to rise inside me when I saw how what I had cooked with love and care was thrown on the dirty floor. I knew that since I got pregnant, I started cooking with fewer spices, for the health of the child. It was just a temporary measure. But instead of just adding a little salt to his portion, he threw everything on the floor, humiliating me and my work. "You could just add salt," I said, trying to contain my emotions. Anton grinned, and his grin was full of contempt. "Huh. I don't need a woman with a belly like a monster's," he spat out, staring at my pregnant belly with disdain. His words, full of hatred, hurt me to the core. I was always afraid that this day might come, although I hoped that fate would turn out differently. But his malicious words erased all doubts. My love for him was dying at that very moment. I couldn't stand his contempt anymore. Something broke inside me, and I felt a determination that had not been there before. I quickly got up from the table and went to my room, where I had hidden the divorce papers in advance. I knew this moment could come, and I was ready. Back in the kitchen, I put the papers in front of Anton, looking him straight in the eye. "Okay, here are the divorce papers," I said calmly, handing him the sheets. Anton, who had expected anything but this, froze. His face was contorted with shock. He stuttered, trying to figure out what was going on. "What the hell is this?" he managed, not believing his eyes. "It was your idea, Anton," I replied calmly. "Now sign them. I'll send it tomorrow." I started thinking about divorce a long time ago, especially after I suspected his infidelity. But until that moment, I wasn't sure if I could handle it alone, especially with a baby on the way. However, now I had a different plan, and the fear was gone. My resolve was unshakable. Anton read it on my face, and his eyes flashed with anger. He was a man used to controlling everything and everyone, especially me. Now, feeling his control slipping away, he exploded. "You're going to regret this," he shouted, breaking into a scream. "Do you think you can survive without me? You're alone with the baby, and I'm going to make you suffer." But I wasn't afraid anymore. Anton couldn't intimidate me anymore. "I'll be fine, Anton, don't worry about me," I replied coldly. Seeing my determination, Anton grabbed the divorce papers and began filling in the blanks, gritting his teeth angrily. "Here you are, if that's what you wanted," I said coldly, handing him the documents. "This is yours now." Anton took the papers with a slight grin, as if he didn't believe that I was seriously ready to go all the way. He probably didn't think that I would actually file for divorce. He didn't think much of it. The next day, without any hesitation or fuss, I filed the divorce papers and left our house. At that moment, I already knew that this decision would be a shock to him when he returned from work and found that I had disappeared. Moving into my parents' house turned out to be a logical step. My father recently returned from Canada, where he had been doing business for a long time, and invited me to stay with them. This offer was like a lifeline in a stormy ocean. I was tired of living with Anton, and I accepted this decision with gratitude. My father, the CEO of a large technology company, has always been an example of resilience and reliability for me, and at this moment I especially felt his support. On the day I left the house, Anton tried to call me 3 times. His persistent calls cut through the silence of my new home, but I ignored them all. I knew he had nothing else to talk to me about except trying to regain the control he had lost. And as soon as Anton realized that he no longer had power over me, his calls stopped. It confirmed my guesses. I had never meant so much to him. Perhaps he was already happy with another woman, his mistress, and would soon marry again. So be it. It's been 6 months. These 6 months have been a time of peace and recovery for me. My child was born safely, and I lived in peace with my parents, enjoying every moment of a new life. My worries finally began to dissolve into the love and support of my family, and every day I felt stronger. My past with Anton began to seem like a distant, almost ghostly chapter, but suddenly he made himself felt again. His persistent calls resumed. At first, I ignored them again, believing that this was only a temporary attempt to regain control. But his calls became more and more frequent, and I eventually had to answer them. "Hi, what do you want now?" I asked, expecting his rude tone, which always sounded in such situations. But this time Anton was annoyed in a different way. There was a surprising anger in his voice. "Why didn't you tell me that your father is a CEO with millions in accounts? Since when are you the daughter of a man with such assets? I never knew that." I felt my fingers tighten around the phone. Everything became clear. It turned out that Anton saw a TV show that showed our family after I returned to my parents' house. A TV show that showcased the lavish lifestyle of the CEO of a large technology company drew attention to our home. The producers filmed an interview with my father, where they discussed the success of his company, family values, and, of course, his condition. They also mentioned an approximate estimate of our family's assets, reaching tens of millions of dollars. I never expected Anton to see this show, but the power of television, as it turned out, was great. And now, when he found out about the wealth that had been with me all these years, his true intentions became obvious. "By the way," I added with cold determination, "I didn't tell you that I have an inheritance of $33 million. It gives me confidence that I can live in peace even after I divorce you. My father told me about him before I left you." His reaction was instantaneous, and there was a fierce tremor in his voice. "What the hell? Why didn't you tell me about this before? Half of it is my right. Give me my money now," he demanded. I sighed, ready for his greed. "You've always thought only of yourself, Anton. And even now, after everything that's happened, all you care about is money. Gifts from parents are not included in the division of property in case of divorce. You know that very well." He paused for a second, as if trying to figure out what I'd said. But before he could object, I continued. "And you forget about your own mistakes. Do you think I'll just forget everything you've done? Your infidelities? You started a relationship with that woman from the company before our wedding, didn't you?" Anton was stunned when he heard from me the truth that I had learned from my father. There was a shadow of bewilderment and fear in his eyes. He clearly didn't expect me to take over. I felt a wave of confidence rising. After all the humiliation and pain, I was finally standing in front of him with full awareness of my strength. "Did you think I wouldn't find out?" My words came out with an icy calmness that even surprised me. "My father has many connections in your company. One of them informed me about everything. You didn't hide your love affairs as carefully as you thought." Anton blushed, and I noticed how his lips tightened into a thin line. He had always been a master of denial, but now his usual tricks didn't work. I saw right through him. "I've never talked about this before," I continued, "but now I'm going to demand alimony. Not only did you betray me, but you also left me pregnant, without any support." Anton flushed, as if my words had ignited a flame of indignation in him. "Stop joking," he shouted. "Why do I have to pay alimony? It's all because of you. You were idle while I was working, you were always pregnant, you didn't do anything useful. It's your own fault that everything turned out this way." He was rushing around in his accusations like a wild animal trapped, not realizing how ridiculous and absurd it looked. I stood in front of him, amazed at his inability to admit his mistakes, and could not believe that I had ever been married to such a man. His sanity seemed to have evaporated along with his dignity. "Are you serious, Anton?" I finally replied, grinning. "Are you accusing me of being pregnant and taking care of the house while you were spending time with your mistress? Do you even realize how absurd this sounds? I never want to have anything to do with you again." He fell silent, his face darkened with anger, but I no longer paid attention to it. My thoughts were clear, my intentions firm. "I've instructed my lawyer to handle the alimony issue," I added, feeling my voice grow more confident. "And yes, you will never see our child again." Goodbye. Anton tried to object, but I wouldn't let him continue. I quickly hung up the phone, feeling my emotions rushing out like a volcano about to erupt. Without hesitating for a second, I blocked his number and, taking a deep breath, finally felt the long-awaited relief. It's over. I sat in silence, feeling the world around me become brighter, calmer. There was no more anxiety, no fear that Anton would break into my life, try to destroy it again. He was just a ghost from the past who couldn't hurt me anymore. But then I heard a thin cry from the other room. My child has woken up. I got up, quickly heading to his room, where the baby was restlessly turning over in his crib. I smiled reassuringly at him. My present and future were here, next to me. And Anton? He was left far behind, along with his endless debts and problems. It turned out that after a while he actually started paying alimony, as a former colleague informed me. Anton complained about his new wife, who, according to him, turned out to be wasteful and drove him into debt. He was running out of money, and his expenses far exceeded his income. He tried to get a part of my inheritance, but without success. I didn't feel a bit sorry for him. He deserved all the difficulties he faced. His anger, harsh words, and cold behavior will remain in my memory forever. Now it was his punishment. Every day when he woke up in a world of debt and obligations, he had to remember how he ruined our marriage and his life. On the other hand, my life has become much simpler and brighter. I enjoyed every moment of raising my child surrounded by a loving family. My father was always there, his support was invaluable. He even mentioned that he was going to hand over the management of his company to me soon. I knew I could do it. I was the daughter of my hard-working father, and I had the same strength as him. Now that new opportunities were opening up in front of me, I was ready to move forward. My future seemed bright and full of possibilities.